My mama knew that my hair was very short and I was dark and that I would break out all the time. She didn't try to help that. My hair was so short, my sister's hair was down her back. I don't understand why when she put extensions in my sister's hair, but not mine. Stuff like that. And I'm somebody I don't know who made up a name, Baldania. I came home and I was crying. I was letting my mama know how I felt about it, and she used that against me. She would yell in the apartment buildings, Baldania, and all that. And that used to really upset me as a kid. Why would you do that now? The kids are calling me that now because you keep calling me that, and stuff like that that I didn't like. I always felt that even from 5, 6, all the way up, that she treated my sister better. And again, she's bleached my skin. She's tried to bleach my skin with bleach almost every day, every night, washing my face, washing myself down with bleach all the time, until my grandmother got wind of it. Because my grandmother, I would break out. My sister may have broke out too, but she was light-skinned and so the spots were light. The spots weren't being as detected on my sister as they were on me when I go to my grandmother's house. And my mom would always try to leave me at my grandmother's house and never take me. My grandmother just kept trying to figure out what's the issue with me. Why don't you take her? Why do you always take her sister with you all the time? So my mom finally took me one time with her and left my sister behind. And I just thought that was the best thing ever. She bleached my skin because it was dirty. During the 80s, the drug epidemic hit our neighborhood. So my mama moved us on the ass end of the earth. That's how I felt. Way past where couldn't nobody save us. We was way out there. I resented her for that because now we're in a predominantly all-white neighborhood. They not used to seeing black people at all, and so we just broke a few barriers just moving to their neighborhood. Here I am. My name is weird. I look weird. At least that's how I felt. These people acting like they just ain't never seen nothing like this before, and it's just a constant struggle. When I got older, I left home. At 16 years old, I knew this was not the life for me. I knew that I wanted better. At least I felt that way. So I went on about my way and left home, and I went and lived with a close relative in the projects, where I felt more comfortable and people looked like me and accepted me. That's where I felt more comfortable at. All the stuff that my mother felt was beneath her, I felt more comfortable. Being in the projects, I picked up a lot of bad habits. Shoplifting was one of them. I would shoplift and give my mama things to get her gratification and to get her to like me and to accept me and all that. So now that she knows that this is what I do, she would come and tell me that this is what she wants. This is what she likes. And because I want to please her, I would go out and get those things for her. I have abandonment issues. I felt like if I didn't get those things for her, I wouldn't see her again. She wouldn't talk to me anymore. My main goal was to satisfy her in my teenage years. Her actions showed me that. If I didn't get it, I wouldn't see her. She wouldn't answer the phone. She wouldn't come by. I would go by, and she wouldn't answer. Stuff like that.
Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm so glad to be back here with you. I know it's been a hot little minute since I've been on the show, but I'm glad to be back. I had some computer stuff going on, and I just got my computer fixed. So I'm happy to be back. So I want to dive right in to today's show. The clip that you just heard was an excerpt from my published dissertation study titled African American Women Who Were Psychologically Abused by Their Parents While Growing Up. My dissertation study was published and it was a labor of love. It was a qualitative study, which means that I did interviews of African American women. Who had experienced psychological abuse from their parents. I talked a lot about the types of abuse that these women experienced from their parents and how this abuse, their experiences with abuse rather, has impacted their life and their relationships going forward into adulthood. Um, and so, you know, there was a lot of painful stories that I had to sit with and just listen to these women pouring their heart out, such as the one you just heard. So, for the clip that you just heard at the beginning of the show, you may have recognized the reader of that particular clip, which was read by my friend, colleague, and podcasting sister, and of course, my all time favorite inspiration, Dr. Joy Harden Bradford, who is the creator of the Therapy for Black Girls podcast and franchise. In the clip that was read by Dr. Joy, um, she is talking from the perspective of one of the women in my study, whose name was Sheila for the purposes of the study. That wasn't her real name, but for that study, her name was Sheila. She is a Black woman from the San Francisco Bay Area in California. More specifically, she was a dark skinned Black woman. She described how she felt rejected by her mother and for being dark skinned and having short hair, which is kind of what you heard Dr. Joy talking about. And in this clip, as well as in this study, she described how she felt further degraded by her mother when her mother would call her Baldonia, which was a form of public shaming that her mother would do in front of other people, essentially shaming her for having short hair. Sheila's pain and sorrow, it was just really further deepened by being subjected to bleach baths, which her mother um, gave her to, which was intended to lighten her skin. She felt unfavorably compared to her sister who had lighter skin and longer hair, which was also discussed in the clip. She basically talked about how she tried everything to get her mother's love and acceptance, going so far as to steal and forge and just do all this criminal activities just to appease her mother. She would essentially go in and, stores and steal stuff to try to win her mother's love and companionship, and only to turn around and be rejected and abandoned by her mother again. I mean, essentially, she described that no matter what lengths she went to, she was never good enough for her mother, which she attributed that to being dark skinned and having short hair. Essentially, she was a victim of colorism and texturism, which we go further into in this study. Um, in the end, Sheila's story is a very heartfelt, deeply rich, and deeply moving story. And she talked about, how essentially she had to let her mother go, or the idea in the idea of her mother go, because at the end of the day, no matter how much she did, how hard she loved her mother, how much she wanted her mother to be a part of her life, her mother would never love her the way that she needed to be loved. Um, and, again, not every story has a happy ending. And just to be honest and keep it real, there are a lot of Sheilas out there in the world. Essentially, there are a lot of misunderstood, dark skinned Black women, Black girls, people with short hair, what have you, people that are shamed for their body appearances, Black features. There are a lot of Sheilas out there in the world. And, if you're one of those misunderstood, dark skinned people, or if you're one of those people that you're misunderstood for the texture of your hair, or if you're misunderstood because you have those Afrocentric features, then this episode is for you. I dedicate it to you. I would also like to personally dedicate this episode to Sheila for allowing me to share a small piece of her story with the world, in hopes that her story can actually help someone. And, I hope that Sheila, as well as any of you who are dealing with these types of issues, are in a much more loving place. And I hope that you are finding the inner peace and love that you so deserve. Um, as a as another note, I would also really like to personally thank Dr. Joy Harden Bradford for doing the reading for me. I definitely wanted to give the show a special touch today, and I really think that by Dr. Joy reading this for me, that's exactly what you did. Thank you so much, Dr. Bradford, for taking time out of your busy schedule to read this for me, for my listeners, and giving it your personal touch. It really means so much to me, that you brought this story to life. And it also means a lot to me that, I know that like you're an amazing superstar and that you can still take the time to kind of help the smaller podcast. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really do appreciate you. Um, diving deep into today's podcast, this podcast is all about the woes of colorism, featureism, and texturism in today's narcissistic society, which thrives on the belief system that lighter skin is preferential to darker skin and white skin is the preference over all of that. This podcast isn't meant to promote racism, or it isn't meant to shame or outcast anyone. But today's episode, as well as all of the other episodes, are meant to deepen our understanding of what people go through that are different from us, and to maybe gain a little bit of knowledge or a little bit of insight into something that we would never even think of. I mean, I learned so much about myself and about others today just from doing the interviews, which are, this is the main reason why I do this show, because I just learned so much, and it breathes so much life into me every time I take on a new topic or I take on a new challenge and frame it around the work of narcissism. So this episode is also, it's geared more towards issues that women face, as a beauty standard, as a relationship standard, and just kind of, it really focuses on that. But I really do believe that every one of my listeners can benefit from listening to it, including men. And maybe there might even be a part two that focuses more on male issues, from a darker skin perspective, of the perspective of a darker skinned male, that also may deal with these issues in society. But just for today's episode, this is where I dived in. And today's expert guest, in addition to Dr. Joy, is Dr. Donna Oriowo. She's the owner of a Nod Right psychotherapy practice and the author of the book Cocoa Butter and Hair Grease. And Dr. Donna, if you remember, she's been on this show before. She did that wonderful episode that we did where we dived in deep to TI and the incident that happened with his daughter. And if you haven't listened to that, definitely go back and listen to that because we got real down and dirty and raw. And the same thing, we're going to do that here. Dr. Donna, she shares her expertise around the issues that darker skinned women and people face, and how this impacts their mental health as well as their relationships. I really enjoy talking to Dr. Donna. Dr. Donna, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule and doing this interview because we just have way too much fun. And I feel like, all of my cool friends are on the East Coast, Dr. Donna, Dr. Joy. So I definitely have to get together with the ladies and maybe we can do something where I just have all of the fabulousness on one episode. Just, in addition to these two ladies, maybe have a few more that I really enjoy talking to. One of the things that I really want to mention before we dive deep into the episode, which I think you're really going to enjoy, is, and part of the reason why it took me a long time to really publish and release this episode as well as anything else, is because there were a lot of technical issues in producing this, and I didn't realize how many there were until I sent it to my editor. I ended up having a virus on my computer, which affected some of the programs. And I didn't realize that until one day my computer didn't work anymore. I turned it on and it wasn't having it. And so I was able to kind of retrieve this and some of the other episodes because it did a lot of damage. Um, but some of the little technical glitches are like little pauses and lags in my voice. I already have a really slow voice. Just to begin with, I'm a slow talker. I mean, one of the people I think left that in my review that I'm a slow talker. I don't know what to tell you. That's just how I am. And I'm not changing it. And I don't feel like I should, but it's just the way that I am. It's the way I've always been. But the sound is a little bit slower than usual in the beginning. Oh, despite all these little hiccups, I feel like the quality of the show is still really, really good. And I think you'll really enjoy it. And so without further ado, here's the interview. Hello and welcome to the show, Dr. Donna. How are you?
I am doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for asking. And I'm glad we finally got to touch base today.
Me too. Despite our technical difficulties, we are working it out.
We are definitely working it out. So, for my listeners who don't know about you, can you tell us a little bit about you and who you are, what you do, and the passion behind your work?
Okay. I'm Dr. Donna Oriowo. I'm a sex and relationship therapist. And my focus is on how colorism and texturism impact mental and sexual health. That is the crux of the work I do, whether or not I am speaking or if I'm doing therapy. It all tends to, for me, come back into this space. You said the passion behind it. The passion behind it is that I love Black people. I really and truly do. It's my love, and not just American Black people, but Black people all across the diaspora. And this is one of those issues that I feel colorism is an issue I feel underlies a lot of what's going on, while at the same time never being something that's really spoken about aloud and thought about the mental and sexual health implications of. So, I mean, that's really part of my passion behind it.
So, for people who don't know, can you tell us a little bit about colorism, what it is, and how it came to fruition?
Yeah. So, colorism is basically the preference and systematic boosting of lighter skin over darker skin. So the closer you are to white supremacist beauty standards,
Hmm.
the more acceptable you are soon to be. So we're talking not just about skin tone by itself, which is colorism, but also things like texturism and featureism. So having Eurocentric looking features, so thinner nose, thinner lips, though the lip thing, not really anymore. Texturism would be having a straighter or looser curl pattern versus having something that is a little bit kinkier. So we're talking about white supremacy and anti-Blackness at the same time with regard to how one presents when they're out in the world.
Mm. How did that become an issue? Why is that so prevalent in today's society?
Well, I'm going to say some things that people probably don't like in the first place, but colorism has always been an issue. And we're talking about even before the dawn of white supremacy in the way that we know it to be now. Because color was often associated with who worked what jobs. So people who were pale were considered to be people who were mostly indoors or had someone to shade them. They didn't have to be outside working the land or
Mm.
anything like that. So it was already, in a sense, tied to one's social status and class status within some societies. So having lighter skin was looked at as, oh, okay, you're not out here in these streets just working.
Mm. Mhm.
But it's also in the same way that, like, fatness has been sort of hijacked and also serves in a sense for white supremacy, because if you were fluffy and fat, you were considered to be wealthy. But these things have changed, and with the global domination through slavery, that has sort of changed the way that we see colorism,
Mm.
because now it is very much tied to white supremacy as a whole. So if we're talking about times of slavery specifically, um, slave masters often raped Black women and those who were enslaved, and they created progeny that were called quadroons, octoroons, etc. So basically the mixed race people. And they were considered a buffer class between white society and Black people. They became a buffer class, and that buffer class came with a certain status. And there were certain markers that people would associate with them, including lighter skin tones and hair textures that were looser in their nature. So
Mhm.
something that felt more familiar to white people and felt more comfortable for them. And thus they were used as a buffer class.
Mm. So, what's the relevance of that today?
It has 100% relevance no matter what you're talking about.
Mm.
And I know that some people are probably shaking their heads right now, like, how is it relevant no matter what you're talking about?
Yes.
But let's take jobs, for example. You went to school, you worked hard, you got great grades. The job comes down between two people who have similar resumes, who have similar experience. One of them is dark and one of them is light. The light skinned person is more likely to get the job. In addition to being more likely to get the job, if there were two jobs, the light skinned person is more likely to be paid more for the job. When we're talking about incarceration, dark-skinned people are more likely to get sentenced for whatever the crime is in the first place, and are more likely to receive more time in jail for the crime in the second place. You are more likely to see light-skinned or ambiguous-looking people of color take up roles that are generally designed for Black characters, because they also help to tick off multiple boxes. So if you're racially ambiguous, you can tick off the Black box, but you might also be able to check off the Latinx box or an Indian box. And you're able to check off all these boxes, and they're able to hire one person of color and say that they have full diversity from your one person. So when we're talking about where colorism and texturism where they show up and where people may be culpable to pushing it forward, we're talking about across industries, across the everyday minutia of life in this country. We're talking about a constant and consistent rhetoric. Like, even when we think about Black History Month is, coming soon, and we talk about activism and who gets to be an activist. If you look back at the voices who have been the loudest and pushed to the forefront, you will also note that many of them are mixed race or light skin. Think on it. It's a whole lot of them. And that's not to say that they should not continue to do the work, but it is to say that for some people, it feels more comfortable to hear about activism work from people that they find to be most similar to themselves, to be more palatable in a sense, in the same way that slave masters used octoroons, quadroons, mulattoes, if you will, as a buffer class between them and Black people. It hasn't stopped. We've continued on.
Okay. That's a mouthful, and that's definitely very thought-provoking. And I'm also wondering, for you, how do you see that show up in relationships?
It turns up in, I love it when we talk. Okay, let me get myself together. I got excited. Okay, so one way would be, before you even get into the relationship, how do you feel about yourself? So now we're talking about your own self-esteem. Now, women have a different tie to beauty than men do. Men are generally seen as the consumers of beauty, whereas women must be the creators of beauty, or they must be the thing that is beautiful. So a woman's value is often linked to her desirability. And that desirability is linked very much to white supremacy. Because in the end of the day, people want the best partner that they can give that is going to give them the highest chances of survival in some way, shape, or form. And there is social value in being beautiful for women. And there is value, period, in having money for men. So rich men are looking for women who are going to give them social value. And the social value that is generally being looked for is someone that is young, someone that is light or white, someone that is thin, someone that has the right hair texture, someone that has a certain body type. So by the time you add all these things together, how do they not show up in a relationship? So when I see it in my therapy office, sometimes the conversation ends up being, I'm a dark-skinned woman, and this man has only ever been after light-skinned women. I'm not sure why he picked me. So then, the questions and the concerns around self-esteem start to show up in the relationship. And in having deeper conversations, sometimes it can come out that it's like, well, darker-skinned women are more grateful to be in a relationship, are willing to take more mess because they've been told they're not desirable. So they're trying to prove themselves worthy of being in a relationship by outlasting nonsense.
Wow.
Light-skinned women will
Mhm.
have conversations about whether or not they're just a trophy to their partner or whether or not they're a real person at all.
Hmm.
And that's sort of how it could show up for romantic relationships. But I have plenty of people that come in to talk about their friendships and friends who don't understand what it's like to be a dark-skinned woman in this time and day where you are not necessarily desired. You might be fetishized, but you're not really desired. And
Mm.
light-skinned women are also feeling the same thing with their friends, where it's like, well, they don't see me. They don't understand what it's like to be me. Yes, people desire me, but do they desire me or do they desire what I look like? And how all of these things sort of coalesce into this space. Though I do want to make sure that I say it up front now that colorism to me and in how I define it, and honestly in the ways that I've seen it defined, colorism is a one-way street.
Meaning?
Meaning that there is no reverse racism. There's also no reverse colorism. Colorism benefits lighter skinned people with so-called good hair.
Hmm.
So when we're talking about colorism, texturism, and featureism, we have to remember that these are the children that racism bore, and there is no reverse. It sucks. You might experience prejudice if you're a lighter skinned woman, but what you're not experiencing is colorism because there's no system in place to oppress you for being light. There is a system in place to oppress you for being Black and dark, not Black and light. To be Black, period. Yes, everyone experiences
Absolutely.
prejudice and racism, but colorism now becomes something that people of color experience, and that experience is the same as racism in a sense. Yes, everyone experiences racism if you're not white, but everyone does not experience colorism unless you're dark. So
Mm.
prejudice against you for being light skinned, yes. Colorism against you for being light skinned, no.
That's very interesting. And so I would imagine from what you're saying, it's showing up within the race of just being darker skin. And I imagine that it goes beyond just being Black because there's darker skinned people in just about every culture or race, so to speak. And so it'd be interesting to see how far this issue really spans
Oh,
in.
it's worldwide.
Yeah, I've known of other cultures, but I'd be curious to see if there are some cultures or races that do embrace darker skin.
I think that we're moving toward a time now where we're seeing some what feels like or might seem like darker skin acceptance, but I wouldn't go and say that things are great now. To me, it's almost akin to like when President Obama was elected, and some people were going around saying that we're in a post-racial society. We're not,
Yeah,
but
absolutely not. Yes.
but people are trying to say the same thing now because they're like, oh, they can name a few darker skinned actresses now. They can name a few darker skinned singers now. So people immediately jump to Lupita, right? Like, oh, she's dark skinned. She's got natural hair. She's beautiful. And she is in a minority. But we
Mm.
don't want to talk about the fact that she's in a minority. So anytime that they need a dark-skinned somebody, they're looking almost
For
at Lupita.
representative, yeah, love
Mm-hmm.
representative. We have that one person that checks that box. Let me ask
Exactly.
you this. You had spoken before about how women, we are the producers of beauty and men are the consumers.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like colorism is as much of an issue with men as it is with women?
Ooh, yes.
Okay. But I imagine
Um,
that dynamics are very different amongst men, right?
yes. Now, I've spent most of my time studying it specifically within the context of women. The way that I've seen it in men, and I do want to say I recognize that we're having a really heteronormative
Yes.
conversation, but even so, within same-sex couplings,
Mm-hmm.
they because there is still, even within those same-sex couplings, there's this almost this weird dynamic of the pursuit of heteronormativity, even within a same-sex situation where people
Absolutely.
are looking like who's masculine, who's feminine, who's the
Right.
boy, who's the girl sort of question.
Yes.
These things still show up there. So this, so I'm saying that it still sort of shows up and in similar ways. So with men, there is more acceptance for men to be darker skinned and still be considered beautiful and desirable, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but with that, they get to be more multifaceted. So someone that you would think of as being traditionally ugly, for example, it is not unexpected for them to have a very attractive partner, even if they are considered ugly, because they might have money or they may still have a desirable body type. So what comes to mind for me is Jay-Z and Beyonce. Ooh, forgive me. But Jay-Z is often thought of as being someone who is not typically attractive. But
Mm-hmm.
we also have to think about why we say he's not typically attractive. He has a wide nose. He has beautiful, lush lips. He is not a light-skinned man. But we think of him as ugly. Oftentimes people think of him as ugly. And generally speaking, they think of him as ugly because he has features that are very Afrocentric.
Mm-hmm.
Beyonce does not. She is lighter skinned. She has a thinner nose. She has beautiful lips, but they're not like, in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
overdone lips. I mean,
Full.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah,
Super
like
full. Yeah.
super,
Mm-hmm.
super full.
Yeah.
And I've seen some beautiful soup coolers myself. So I'm just like, oh, but people look at that coupling and they say it makes sense because her social capital matches with his financial capital.
Mm.
While at the same time, when he cheated, they were just like, how you cheat on Beyonce? Because they see the social capital of Beyonce. So this trading of capital, this is not new. This has been part of the dynamics of picking partners since whenever we are, in a sense, we're looking for someone that has something that we desire, want, need, whatever, and they are looking for something that they desire, want, need, or whatever. But we oftentimes, I think, we don't often pay attention to how white supremacy also plays into that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tell me about hair, black hair.
What about black hair?
Tell me about the woes of having black kinky hair.
The woes
How
of
does
having,
texturism show up in relationships, the workplace?
oh, within relationships, kinky hair shows up as almost an untouchable. I mean, there's often, when we talk about closeness, and when you think of like movies where they show sexy bed hair, usually when you close your eyes and think of what sexy bed hair looks like, it is not attached to a black woman.
Mm.
It is attached to a white woman whose hair is slightly tangled and must look like she just had the best sex of her life or the best sleep of her life. And that's considered sexy. An afro mushed on one side, less so. Right? So it plays into even our views of what sexy is. And there's this, oh, I just want to run my fingers through her hair. But within Black communities and Black culture, many Black men would tell you that you don't do that. You don't touch a woman's hair.
Mm-hmm.
That you don't touch a Black woman's hair because you don't know what's going on in there. You don't know if it's a weave. You don't know And there's a cost associated, and a time cost as well as a financial cost associated with getting one's hair done.
Mm-hmm.
So some research and some researchers are talking about whether or not that also limits intimacy. That there's almost a bar against the intimacy, because the bar is you can't touch my hair. That you can touch anywhere else, but you can't touch my hair.
What do you
that
think?
Intimacy can be lost in that space.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
I think that I understand exactly where they're coming from, because there's something to be said about what it feels like to have someone's hands in your head.
Mm-hmm.
There is an intimacy and a bonding experience. And, like, to take it away from romantic relationships, like, think about what it was like when you were a child, to sit betwixt, mommy or auntie's knees or grandma's knees, and they do your hair.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a time of love and bonding and of total trust. And how you can't have that with your significant other because they cannot touch your hair.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine that it does. But I've also grown up in a household where, my dad know how to do a sew-in. Come on now.
Oh.
I braid the base, and my daddy gets out the needle and thread, and he can sew in the hair.
I need to talk to him.
There has been an intimacy with my partner has helped me take out my braids before, and the level of closeness that I felt in those moments, that, this man has his hands in my hair, and my hair is filthy, because you know how it goes with braids. You had them for a little while, and I just, but there's still this feeling of closeness, this intimate bond that happens through hair. And Black women have such a strong relationship with their hair. It almost seems sad that connection could be lost from a romantic partnership because they are not allowed to touch your hair.
Do you think hair also gets in the way of friendships?
Oh yeah. I think it both gets it makes people come together and pushes them further apart at the same time.
Really?
Yeah, like in the coming together, there can be a mutual admiration of hair. Like, oh, I love your hair is so pretty. And oftentimes when we say hair is pretty, that language is usually reserved to someone that has a naturally straighter curl pattern. Like, oh, your hair is so pretty. So it's almost like there's an envy. Like, oh, your hair is so beautiful. I want to touch it. And I want to be close enough to you to have permission to touch your hair, to be able to share that space with you, where you're not a petting zoo per se, but we have a relationship that allows me access to your person and that allows you access to my person. But at the same time, so there's the love in a sense, but there's also the hate, because it's, you have this thing that I don't have and I am envious of it. So when I see people say hair goals, it always makes me cringe just a little, because it makes me wonder, well, what is the narrative that you have about your hair and the narrative that you have about the hair someone else has that would say that I want that hair? But because in the same time, it's almost like that there's something not right about yours. So it shows up in friendships in that way of, I love you and I'm jealous of you at the same time, which can make relationships complicated, because
absolutely,
white supremacy is now present in your in that friendship. And it can be hurtful and it can be hard. You also asked how it shows up in the workplace. Well, you might not get the job. You could be sent home. How you style your hair is a huge area of contention countrywide. So much so that the Crown Act has come into being.
Which we just signed into California. Luckily, we have a governor that is pro the underdog, right? Us,
yes,
inmates, other, people that are unmentionables by society. That was, that's crazy that we actually have to have a bill or an act or a law of some sort to say that we can wear our hair a certain way.
Exactly. And to be able to wear it the way it grows out of your head, as though that's the piece that's radical. And California did it first, New York
Yes.
did it second, New Jersey did it third, and most recently. And I'm just waiting on my representatives here in Maryland to get it together, because Six Flags America has been known for hair discrimination.
Really?
Almost every summer there is something about how they don't like somebody with dreads, and if you have locks, you can't get the job. I mean, even recently there's a story going on about a young fellow in Texas, I want to say, who is being barred from graduation because of his locks.
Wow.
So, I mean, it interferes educationally, because there's so many rules around how you can wear your hair, and often these rules do not favor Black and brown people. Then there's it carries on into working environments where there's a expected dress code
Mm-hmm.
and a way that you're allowed to show up, especially in corporate America,
Mm-hmm.
that generally requires you to be the buffer class, to move yourself in the position that helps white people to feel most comfortable and see things that they're most familiar with. So straighten your hair, wear the style of dress that they would wear, to do the things that you can do to manipulate the things that you can manipulate in order to be in the space.
Absolutely. And on some level, it was deemed by society that being Black or being dark and having kinky hair is not beautiful. So for a lot of people, there's a lot of trauma tied up in that, right? You might have been teased, antagonized, like you said, looked over, had to take more mess because of having these features. I mean, if you think about it, the hair industry, the makeup industry are multi-billion-dollar industries.
Yes, they
Based
are.
off of our trauma and our desire to
And our
hide
insecurity.
and our insecurities, to hide those things. I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that and about cultural appropriation. I believe that's what it's called when Kim K or someone else decides to, take those features and put it up on her Instagram as the coolest thing. And it becomes the coolest thing. Oh, she's so beautiful for the very
Edgy.
same thing. Yes, for the same things that we got cut to the white meat for.
Mm. Cultural appropriation is definitely one of those things. It totally irks my soul when I see it, because everything is ghetto until it is seen or associated with whiteness. It's like whiteness takes the thing, washes it clean in a sense, and they are now free to use it as an accessory, something that is a way of life or deeply tied to someone, becomes a simple accessory for white people that of which they will experience no negative consequences. So everybody wants to be Black until it's time to be Black. What's the other one? They all like our rhythm, but they don't want our blues. People want to take from and commodify what Blackness has to offer, or what Black people have to offer, so that white people can have fun with it. I think about, I love to travel. And I've traveled to a few Caribbean places, warm weather, sunshine. I like that. And the most disturbing thing for me is how white people will consciously or unconsciously move away from you and all the things that feel so Black about you. But when they get to Jamaica, when they get to the Bahamas, they go get braids. It boggles the mind. And Kim K has, it, to me, is probably one of the most egregious examples of today of someone that gets to profiteer the way they do off Black culture. I mean, she wears cornrows. They call it boxer braids. You see a white girl with Bantu knots. They call it mini buns. And just, the constant taking from Black culture. And to me, it's really about the commodification. So like it becomes a hot commodity that makes somebody else rich. Black people very rarely see the money come from the things that they popularize.
Absolutely.
They mostly get the pushback. We're the ones that, are more likely to be sent home, told to change our hair, lose the job, not get paid as much, never get the job in the first place, be told that we're not fitting in with company culture.
Yes.
And white people get to play dress up on our backs and make money off of it. And we're supposed to sit silently and be okay.
So it goes much deeper than racism. Or, I would even say it's almost like a branch or subdivision of racism. If
Definitely.
you will.
Yeah.
It's like
and
a layer.
Even like the way that I think about racism, I can't help but first be thinking about white supremacist capitalism, because everything falls under it. What reason have white people to despise Black people? It was about money to start, and it's about money now. And the stealing from Black people and Black culture to commodify and make money is the same. Nothing has really changed. Colorism serves a monetary purpose, which is why you can have a company like Unilever, who owns Dove, tell you about the Love Yourself campaign on this end while being the number one company selling skin bleaching creams in other parts of the world. They get to dip their hand in the pot twice, telling you to love yourself and your skin tone and all that stuff on this end, while having companies and subsidiaries that promote skin bleaching creams in other spaces. So how is it not about money? I mean, even the Love Yourself as You Are movement is still steeped in the money.
When you brought up Dove, I thought you were going to bring up that commercial that they removed. You know the one.
I do know the one.
Where you literally washed the black off of you and you came out Snow White. That showed a Black person and washed with Dove and came out white.
And I was just like, this is how you know you did not have people of color in that room. There were no Black women in that room. Because someone would have said, maybe not. Maybe not. But
I don't know.
I have no words for that. Because I can see the reel in my head right now. I can see it going on. And I'm just like, wow, somebody thought that this was a good idea. So but at the same time, when I think about it more deeply about the company that owns Dove, it also makes complete sense. I'm looking like, yes, you do tell people to wash the black off them in other parts of the world where bleaching creams are more widely acceptable.
Why not?
So why not?
So what's the solution, you think, to this? At least within our culture. Mm-hmm. What's within Black people, how can we fix this? How can we sort of band together and kind of overcome this, if that's possible?
I have a lot of time to think about how we can get better and what we can do. And I think one of the things that first come to me is, with this background as a social worker, I'm just like, there are no problems that you can fix that you have not acknowledged our problems. If we don't acknowledge colorism, texturism, featureism, and the role of white supremacy as a problem, we cannot even hope to begin to do the work that is going to make us all better.
Absolutely.
So we have to first acknowledge that it's a problem and recognize that just because, because when we start to think about the problem, right, we start to conceptualize where the problem started in our lives. And for some of us, it started with our moms, our aunts, grandmas. Stay out of the sun. Don't get no darker. Oh, your hair's so nappy. The disparaging comments. And the thing is, a lot of times we leave it right there. And part of the reason we don't explore this further is because it's like, no, I love my mama. I love my auntie. I love my grandma. I can't think about this. I can't acknowledge this, because if I admit my pain here, if I admit the trauma, if I admit that this thing has hurt me and that they are the hands that have hurt me, that somehow that means I love them less, or I'm betraying them for all the things that they have done in my life. And I'm just like, that means to me that you're not ready yet to see your people, your parents, your grandparents, your auntie, your family members as full people who are capable of good and bad. And even furthermore, recognizing that it didn't start with them. That's not where this bubble begins. This bubble begins with white supremacy, which means that you're African American or Black or Caribbean or whatever they are, it didn't start there. Go back to the source where it belongs. You go back and back and back. So you have to ask, okay, I got it from my people. Who did they get it from? They got it from their people. Who got it from their people? And go back and back and back and back until you see that the people that gave it to you are not yours.
Mm-hmm.
I think that acknowledgement and that recognition that this is an intergenerational hand-me-down helps us to get to a space of the type of healing that we need.
Absolutely.
Which begins with that acknowledgement that we are hurt and that we were hurt by people that we love, but that they were hurt too by people that they love. And being able to recognize that it didn't start with us. We may maintain the house of white supremacy through colorism and texturism and how we treat one another, but this is the house that white supremacy built. We live here. We didn't build this.
I would agree. And I wonder too if part of it is saying that, you know what, I don't want to sit at this table anymore. I think a large part of what we do is because we want acceptance by those who are refusing to accept us, no matter how we bend and change, which in and of itself is very narcissistic. But when you take your power back and you say, you know what, I don't want to sit at this table anymore. I don't need to be accepted by you in order to be loved. I can go create my own within my own, build from that cup.
To know that success can be removed from white supremacy, that's the secret sauce. If there was secret sauce, that is it. Because so many people, it's almost like, in a lot of ways, we've been taught that we should be grateful for what white people allow Black people and people of color to have. And that moves back, even within the context of colorism and texturism, that you should be grateful that you have certain features because you're not going to be mistaken as, some too dark coon, or to be an ape or a monkey, or any other of the disparaging comments that can come from this idea that anything that comes out of Africa or that has association with Africa is bad and wrong. that Blackness is not okay. That's that anti-Black rhetoric. And to get better, to move forward, acknowledging, recognizing that things don't start in the one place that we decide to start a story, because people like to be very convenient about where they start stories.
Absolutely.
Like American history starting with slavery, or Black history starting with slavery, is so wrong. I mean, it goes far back beyond that, but that's where they start because it's a convenient place to start. And I'm just like, you have to go back and back and back and back and back and back some more. Because for me, the true meaning of Sankofa, you have to look back in order to move forward. So, I mean, even within how we get better, looking back first. Recognize where you are, then look back. And in your wildest dreams, where do you want to be? What does it look like? What are your goals? How much do you want to love yourself? What would that love look like, feel like, smell like, taste like?
Absolutely.
How would you dress that body? How would you adorn that body? What would you do with your hair if you loved you? If you loved your hair exactly as it was and didn't talk about, oh, how hard it is to manage. Because just because you have not been taught how to manage your tresses as they grow out of your hair does not mean that your hair is difficult to manage.
Absolutely.
Like, if you want to compare it to straight hair, which a lot of us are doing, then yeah, you can have conversations about manageability all day long. But even that, to me, is anti-Black language. Your hair's not hard to manage. It is different, and you don't know how to manage it. Doesn't make it difficult.
Or love it. I think it all starts with love. I don't think anything becomes difficult or tedious or cumbersome or awful or ugly if you don't know how to take care of it and love it. And I think that starts from within.
And loving it to its core. And the core is you, because it's your hair. It's your skin. You have, beyond the right, you have a duty to love yourself. You have this duty. And I know that's a hell of a lot of responsibility, but I say you have the duty. And this is a mantle that I have taken up because as I have, one of my friends told me one day that she had divested from whiteness. And I was just like, whoa, it struck me when she said it. It struck hard and it struck deep. And it got me thinking about how all the ways that I have not divested at that moment. And through my divestment, I've had to learn to love myself on levels that I never thought were possible. And in so doing, what I recognize is that when we learn to accept ourselves, we give people around us who get to be graced with our presence permission to do the same. I was the first one to go natural in my family. And the first time I went natural, it was some tough stuff right there. It was.
I can relate.
You don't look like you're going to leave the house looking like this, like no one loves you. And this is almost embarrassing. Just all the things that they tell you, and they're trying to shield you, and they love you. And this is the way that they know to love you. Right. And that doesn't make it right. It just makes it what it is. And I had to love me more, to the point where I could love me and have my natural hair, that I loved me because my hair was natural, that I had to get into that space. And when I got into that space and I loved me and went so hard for me as I did go, my whole family is natural now. Not a perm among the bunch.
Same here.
And, when I look back on it and I just remember, I'm never giving up the creamy crack. That's what I used to hear about relaxers. Oh, we're never giving it up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I'm never going back.
Exactly.
And at some point they joined me. And it has been a crazy, beautiful confirmation since then. All it took was one person to go natural for other people to do it. That we can teach a nation through how we show up in the world and how we give ourselves permission. And I'm not saying that it's easy, because it comes with pushback. It comes, and beyond pushback that can hurt your feelings, it can come with death. just to be quite frank, in white supremacist America, being you, that, and as if you're non-male and non-white at the same time, it could be your last day. But some of us have to take this risk because we cannot change the tide if we don't show up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tell me about cocoa butter and hair grease, how that came about.
Cocoa butter and hair grease came from so many different spaces, but the main one was probably through the journey that I got to take while doing my dissertation. My dissertation was called, "Is It Easier for Her? Afro-textured hair and its effects on Black female sexuality, a mixed methods approach." And I have so much data from that. Over 200 people, women identified people, took this survey. Black women identified people. They told me their skin tone. They told me their hair texture. They told me how they felt about discrimination at work, in their communities, in their families, with relationships. They gave me a wealth of knowledge that I felt could not die in academia.
Absolutely.
I felt that it definitely needed to go beyond that because everyone does not have financial privilege to go and access these documents that they like to guard, like, like golden nuggets or pieces of diamond or silver. And it needed to move beyond that, especially because I was so moved in the process of doing this research, of doing that work. And, I found a way to do it in therapy. And I'm really happy to have been able to do it in therapy.
Absolutely.
But I just like, you know what? I live in the Washington, D.C. area. There's one of me. How many people do I know who are doing this work in this way that combine sexuality and mental health? I've heard of people doing mental health, but not sexuality. Not to the depth of knowledge that I have been able to gain through study as well as living. I think people know about sex because they have sex, so everyone thinks they're an expert on sex. I'm like, you're an expert on your sex, not the breadth and depth of sexuality. And though I would not go out as far as to say I know everything there is to know about sexuality, I can tell you how hair matters in it. I can tell you how skin tone matters in it. I can tell you how it all impacts mental health, sexual self-efficacy. I can tell you about whether or not you are able to really consent in a situation where you feel ugly and that if you don't have sex with this person, that they might leave you. That's not real consent. That's coercion by another name. And I get to see how all of these things were coming together in this matrix of clients that I was seeing individually and couples wise. And I was just like, it would be a shame if something happened to me and that was the end. So I wrote the book.
Tell me about the book.
The book is a 3-month journey because it has weekly prompts, weekly activities for you to embark upon to do that work. So remember I said Sankofa, you got to look back. So part of it is talking about origin stories of where you learned this thing or that thing about your hair texture or your skin tone. To think about how it plays out now in all kinds of relationships, for you to make a goal on what it is that you ultimately want. Now that you know what the knowledge is and know where you stand now, those secret things that we keep to ourselves, because a lot of us will say that, oh, Black is beautiful, while at the same time amending in our heads, well, that type of Black is beautiful. I would be more beautiful if my hair texture or my skin tone were changed. Because what I learned in my dissertation is that a lot of people would have preferred to have a lighter skin tone. A lot of people prefer to have a different hair texture than the one that they were born with. And usually they were all going for 3 ABC hair. They wanted the defined loose curl, easy to brush up into a ponytail curl. They did not want what they felt was the difficulties of having 4C hair. And it made me sad when I saw that. I'm like, over 200 participants, and I messed up this thing and had some participants re-participated and new participants came, and I'm looking at it and the data was the same. And it made me so sad to see it. How many people wanted to change pieces of who they were because they didn't like it.
Absolutely.
And this book, Cocoa Butter and Hair Grease, sort of speaks to that, because it asks you to talk about where you are right now with your skin tone and with your hair texture, to let out that inner secret and say what you would rather your hair texture or your skin tone be, to talk about the origin stories that we get from our family and friends, to think about the messages that we've received and the messages that we don't want to pass on, to think about ultimately how we love ourselves. And while you have the weekly prompts that do that piece, there's a whole other section of the book, just an activity section, because there's some days where doing that activity is too much. So you have crossword puzzles, you have coloring pages, you have how they call it, there's word searches, yes, and crossword puzzles. That's right. I had the right language.
Absolutely.
But then there are also challenges in there. So to take the work off the page and into the world, to curate your social media so that you see people who look like you with your hair texture, people that you may not have thought of as being hair goals, to cultivate community by having friends or family members create that intimate bond with your hair once again and have someone do your hair. Whether or not you compensate them with pizza or cash, it's almost something in there. To try out a new hairstyle so that you can learn to better manage your hair instead of saying that it's difficult to manage.
Absolutely.
It takes the work from the book to the real life that you're going to live.
Absolutely.
And that you don't have to do it alone, because there is a Cocoa Butter Hair Grease community. On Instagram, yes, there's, the Cocoa Butter and Hair Grease Instagram page, and there is a corresponding page on Facebook, but there's also now a private group on Facebook called the CBHG Collective, Cocoa Butter Hair Grease Collective. It is only open to African American people. You have to identify as Black to be in that space.
Good to know. I'll definitely put the links in the show notes there.
And you can join that space. And the work there is about how we open our minds to have conversations that are tough. So I find I have a lot of articles that come my way, things out in media. Like I read one article, it was by a super light-skinned African-American person, Black person, who can almost pass for white. And I can't remember the exact title, but the title was something akin to dark-skinned Black people have every reason not to trust you as a light-skinned person. Here's why. That's hard.
That is.
That is
in your face.
Exactly. And written from a light-skinned person's perspective. And we had a bit of dialogue around that. And I'm in that group and I'm running that group, and I'm giving what I've got to give in that space, while being honest and recognizing that no matter how much work anyone thinks they've done, there's more work to be done.
Absolutely.
As far as I've come, I know I've got more work to do.
Absolutely.
And we need safe spaces to be able to do that work that do not center white people or whiteness, which is why only Black people are allowed in the space.
And we share similarities in our dissertation, because that's how my niche of narcissism was born, was from interviewing Black women who had narcissistic parents or who had been psychologically abused. And part of their abuse from their parents while growing up had to do with texturism and colorism and body image and things like that. And so there was a lot of just very hurtful things that women, especially darker skinned women, had experienced, but also things that, if you really sit down and think about it, are very insightful. So I'm totally on board. If people want to work on the issue, fix the issue, address the issue, where can they start?
Ooh, you can start with acknowledging that you have a problem, that there
Okay,
is that, and that it shows up in your life.
good.
You can find the people that you feel that you can work with. I am always going to advocate for therapy. I can't help myself.
Absolutely.
So finding the right therapist for you and letting them know that, hey, this is what I want to address. Are you
Absolutely.
able to help me address this? Because
Absolutely.
everybody is not qualified to do that work. But you can even tell them, you can grab a copy of Cocoa Butter and Hair Grease and tell them that they need to get one for their practice as well. And that this is the workbook that you would like to go through with them
Sure.
so that you can do this work.
Sure.
Or you can do it with me. I mean, if you're in the DMV area, for one, yes,
Right
open
on.
for therapy. And I am also going to be training therapists who want to do this work with me.
Nice.
Um, but I'm also starting a therapeutic group, not therapy, therapeutic. It will be online. I'm hoping to have
Nice.
the first run of it in maybe like March, because it's going to be
Yes.
3 months. And I'm also going to have a live version of it. So whether it's individual or group, I know I'm available. And I also go places and I teach about this.
Mm,
So invite me and I will come.
nice. Awesome. And where can people find you if they want to connect with you or purchase the book, which I'll also put in the show notes?
They can purchase a book on Amazon. Hey, hey, hey. But if you're really trying to help us this out, I ask that you actually purchase it from my website.
Mm-hmm.
So cocoa butter and hairgrease.com. So
Okay.
COCOA, cocoa butter and
Okay.
hairgrease.com. And the website is coming. Right now, it just redirects to a different page on anodwrite.com that's
Yeah.
not linked. But I have been working with an amazing website designer.
Ooh.
And the only thing holding up progress is me right now, because I wanted to have a couple of blog posts already written so that
Right.
it's ready. And, no one's looking like, hey, you're so inconsistent with your blog posting.
Exactly.
So right now it's about the writing that I know I need to do, but the website will be up before the end of March. So it
I
will
can
be a
totally
place to get
relate.
the
Yeah.
newest hair news and to get additional things. I'm already thinking about some extra stuff I want to do with cocoa butter,
Nice.
including more activities and things that will be exclusively for people who
Nice.
bought the book. So
Awesome. I can't wait
I'm
to see it.
trying to do it
Awesome.
all. Try to do it all.
And I love it. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. This is a much needed discussion and one that I don't think that people think about often enough or work to rectify often enough. So I appreciate you being there and offering your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, especially for the second time. I'm so excited.
Yes. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for listening. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about the show, what you thought about this particular interview, this particular topic. Um, I'd also like to give a special, warm, heartfelt thank you to Dr. Bradford for reading that script for me. I really appreciate you, Joy, and I thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do that special reading. It's always great to have a sister friend do something special for you, and that I really appreciate that from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. So, also for my listeners, be sure if you want to keep in touch and keep up with what's going on the podcast and with me, be sure to join me over on social media on Instagram, Facebook, and also you can always follow the podcast on my website, adatewithdarkness.com. If you have questions, comments, or if you want to refer someone to do an interview, a date with darkness at gmail.com. I always love hearing from the listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in. One last thing I definitely want to mention is the Facebook group, the small but growing A Date with Darkness Facebook group for members, for people that are, kind of struggling with their toxic relationships. They're getting out, they're moving past it, they're working on their own healing. We're here to support you, and we hope you are there to support others as well. So, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, you guys take care of yourselves, stay safe, and be well.